In a previous video, we talked about the fuel injector for a typical Lycoming fuel injected engine, which sits on the bottom of the engine. It has the throttle body and it has the fuel control unit, otherwise known as the fuel servo, which proportions the correct amount of fuel to go with the air being consumed by the engine. So now we're going to go into more detail about the flow divider, or spider as it's sometimes called, as well as the injector nozzle. There's one injector nozzle in each cylinder. It's in the intake port right behind the intake valve. So its role is to deliver the fuel and also partially atomize the fuel. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the flow divider, which sits usually on top of the engine, on a Lycoming engine, this takes metered fuel in and then it divides it and delivers it out to each cylinder through stainless steel injector lines out to the nozzles, which are screwed in the intake port. This serves another function though besides dividing the fuel. When you go to idle cutoff with the mixture control in the cockpit, normally what would happen is that through capillary action in these stainless steel fuel lines, you would still get a little bit of fuel being delivered to each nozzle, which would cause the engine to continue to run for a while after you shut the mixture off to idle cutoff. So this thing has a mechanism to positively shut off fuel. Once metered fuel quits flowing in here, it will positively shut off through a spring and a diaphragm on the valve so that no fuel can flow out to the injector nozzles via capillary action. So those are the two functions that are served by the flow divider. Now let's take this thing apart and see exactly what makes it tick. So we've already taken the safety wire off of these screws and pre-loosened them just for expediency's sake. So we'll take these screws out and see what we got. Okay, you take this cover off, you can see the screw and the diaphragm here. So we'll put the screw aside. Now this diaphragm is connected to a valve. It's a stem type valve here, and you can see exactly what that looks like. Now let's go ahead and take these 4 screws off and take the cover off the other side and see what we got here. Again, I pre-loosened these screws just for expediency's sake. All right, so get the rest of these out by finger. Like so. And then we take this cover off. You have a gasket there, like so. And so that just reveals the bore that this valve slides in. So the valve slides in from this side, and through action in the bore there actually does the fuel cutoff and also the dividing of the fuel, because keep in mind at very low fuel flows, the fuel flow might not actually be delivered to the nozzles equally. So the way this thing handles that is at very low fuel flows via this valve and some annular openings in here will basically control the amount of fuel that goes to each nozzle. Again, it's not metering the fuel, it's just controlling how much goes to each nozzle so that it gets divided evenly. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see those annulars. Let me see if I can shine a flashlight up through here. And so if you look about 1/4 of an inch down from the top surface of this, you'll see these triangular shaped annulas or openings. Not sure if that is showing up in the camera or not. But those triangle shaped annulars, which are kind of pointed down, the triangle shape is pointed down. Basically what happens here, let's go to the other side. If you notice on the other side, here's where metered fuel comes in, and you can see that it has an opening to flow into this cavity here. And from the other side, we've got our valve. This is a hollow valve, but it's also got some holes here and it's got a recessed section here. So when we install this thing, this valve into the bore like so, so you've got metered fuel that comes into this opening, fills this cavity, and also fills the hollow portion of that valve. And because this fuel is flowing under pressure, it tends to push against the spring and diaphragm like this to open the valve this way. So when that valve opens, like so, and it's going to open proportionally according to the amount of fuel flow that's coming in through metered fuel, that's going to progressively open those annulas. Basically, this, let's see if I can point it out here. This is the leading edge that opens up those triangular shaped annulas so that it progressively opens up to allow flow to go out to each of these nozzles. If you didn't have that, at very low fuel settings, one nozzle might flow more fuel than the other. Now, when the engine's running at high fuel flows, this thing is opened all the way up, and the size of the annulas in here is larger than the orifice of the fuel injector nozzles. So at that point, the flow divider is not really proportioning fuel anymore. The actual distribution from nozzle to nozzle is more a function now of the orifice size in the individual injector nozzles. But at low fuel flow settings, these annulas will actually make sure that the flow gets divided evenly between all the nozzles. So that's how that works. So from a maintenance perspective, if you take one of these things apart, what you really want to look for is that there's no scoring on the valve. And also you want to take a good look inside the bore with a magnifying glass and a light and make sure there's no scoring. If you have scoring, you're pretty much done. You have to replace this thing. But in terms of servicing these things, you can't really replace the valve, but you can replace the gasket and the spring. In fact, I have over here, I have a new gasket and a new spring. So that's what we're going to install today. But that's pretty much the limit of servicing these things, other than maybe cleaning them. But you can't replace this diaphragm and valve or the bore. So once those get scored, you're pretty much done. And if this thing does score, then what's going to happen is it's going to cause it to stick. This valve will not move easily inside the bore, and then that's going to cause it to act up and have symptoms similar to a faulty nozzle. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and put a new gasket and spring in this thing today. So let's move these aside so we don't get them mixed up with the new parts. So we'll open this package up, put a new spring in here. Orientation of this spring doesn't matter, so it rides right in this groove right here. We'll get the screw holes lined up on the diaphragm here. And again, there's no particular orientation here. We just need to get the screw holes lined up. We'll get the screw in here. And then this little embossed section goes in line with the metered fuel inlet. So we'll carefully put this thing down here, like so. And then we need new star washers for these screws, so I'm not going to tighten these screws yet or safety wire them, but I'm just going to temporarily put them in place, and then I'll pull the screws out one at a time and put new star washers on them. And actually what I'll do is just put 2 of the screws in to hold the assembly together, so that later we can replace the star washers. I don't happen to have any star washers at hand right now, so we'll do that later. Okay, so that's how you would do that end of it. And then over here, we need a new gasket. And again, no particular orientation on the gasket here. So we will go ahead, line that up like so. And as you can see on the cover, It has flush screws, like so. So we don't want to put them in this way, we want to put them in this way. There we go. Thread these in like so. Work our way around. And 2 down, 2 to go. Now you don't need a whole lot of torque on these screws, so just snug them up. That's all you want to do, just snug them up. Like so. And just so we don't lose these screws, I will put these in finger tight as well. And we'll come back in, replace the star washers. Actually, because these are safety wired, you probably don't need new star washers because each of these screws has a provision for safety wire. So it's probably not critical that we replace those star washers. And again, no need to over tighten them. I'm just going to snug them. And there we go. And that's pretty much the limit of what you can do servicing these flow dividers.